Okay, so today we're covering malt and malting along with strong-ish and dark-ish European beers. It was supposed to be lagers, but one of them's not a lager. So dive in at the very important stuff. Let's start with the first beer, which is the Hacker-Saw, never pronounce it, Oktoberfest Marzen, that one. So the glass. I'll read out a little bit some of the highlights from the description of Marzen, of which it is a example, while we get some aroma and some thoughts on it. So we should have moderate intense aroma of German malt, typically rich, bready, somewhat toasty, light bread crust notes, clean lager fermentation character, no hop aroma, caramel, dry biscuit, roasted malt aromas, very light alcohol may be detected, should never be sharp, clean, elegant malt richness. So who's filled in a sheet on this? Do you want to start with your thoughts on the aroma, somebody?
Yeah, so yeah, the definitely picked up caramel and red, high malt and sweetness going on. I thought I picked up a bit of dried fruit, maybe sort of raisiny, but I think where I'm going with that is because I wrote it a bit later, was more like cake mix. It kind of reminds me of when you're just making a cake and you're making a cake mix, you know, with the amount of sweetness going on. So yeah,
I like that for a mix of sort of spicy and grainy sort of things you get out in that description. Quite good, a good one. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
Yeah, when I first opened mine, I detected a slight note of alcohol, but that's kind of disappeared now. But yeah,
I just put it down as on. I did pick it up. I put it as low. I picked up a low bit of alcohol in there.
Yeah, I got a bit of sulphur at the start, but you'd expect that with lagers. That's fine. That's more than I'd normally expect, but it was within reason.
Yeah,
but it sort of faded away.
I've got that down as low as well.
Yeah.
Just
the bready thing is definitely there. I'd agree with that.
I put rich certainly in the malt. I ticked the rich box because that is what it is. It's incredibly. I was amazed how malty it smelled and how kind of rich it was. It's great.
Yeah, you start getting these with these the malty European lagers. There's actually a lot of malt flavour there, which we try and get some descriptions out, like your breads, your bread crusts. You can get hints of your caramels and toffees in there, but they're usually fairly low in these. Actually, caramels allowed. Biscuit. Once again, we come back to our American versus English description of what a biscuit is. As in, they're more like a savoury scone.
I specifically had hobnob biscuits in.
Yeah, yeah. Be specific about your biscuit, because especially in the exam, because the score sheets you're sending may well get sent to America to get marked. So any specifically British things, just call them out, because they mightn't know about them. I think that's a good call out on the aroma. So appearance-wise, amber, decent head, keeps there.
Crystal clear.
Yep. Yeah, I think the one note here on this is that amber, orange, deep reddish copper should not be golden. So there are two Oktoberfest / Marzen styles. There's another one in pale lagers called Fest Beer. He says he's going to find it, which is what you normally get at Oktoberfest type events now, which is much more like a classic German lager and much less like this, and which was historically what was served, was much more like this, the Marzen, and maybe even the stronger Marzen.
I actually went to Oktoberfest in Munich this year, and they're a lot more like the Fest beer generally, than this. There was nothing really as malty as this that I came across, or at least that I can remember. Which is...
yeah, after a couple of those ginormous glasses of beer, memory can fade quite fast. Cool. Should we move on to the flavour for a moment? If you want to have already tasted it or want to get another mouthful. Okay, who'd like to throw in some thoughts on flavour?
Well, I'm
Yeah,
getting
so
that.
I had it down at initially it's quite sweet, but then there's a bitterness that comes in that sort of dries it out, which is quite nice, really, because it stops it from being overly sweet. So you actually go back for more, which I quite liked. Some piney and spiciness going on with the hops, I think, and then I think this is actually where I wrote hobnob biscuits as well, with the amount of breadiness going on and biscuitiness, and yeah.
Dave, you want to throw something in?
The cake mix that was mentioned in the aroma, I'm getting down the flavour as well, a kind of fruit cake mix. So again, the spice is the fruit, the demerara sugar sort of thing in the mix together.
Yeah, the sugars are good though. I mean, I often use, as you'll probably see when I read out some of these variations up and down, caramels and sugars are good descriptors to use, because most people will understand them. I mean, well, the description here is initially malt flavour suggests sweetness, but finishes medium dry to dry, which sort of matches up with what you were saying, Craig. Distinct complex maltiness, bready, toasty aspect. Hop bitterness is moderate. Hop flavour is low to none. German types. Yeah, floral, herbal, spicy. Hops provide sufficient balance to the malt palate and finish do not seem sweet. The aftertaste is malty, but the elegant, rich, malty flavours, lingering, noticeable caramel, biscuit, or roast flavours are inappropriate. Once again, I think this is more talking American biscuit than hobnob, which is more a rich malt flavour. Whereas maybe talking something more, savoury scone, I think is probably the best description, more floury. Any other thoughts on this?
Craig was talking about like a dryness at the end after that initial sweetness, and it's quite a surprising level of bitterness actually at the end. Once you've stopped drinking for more than a few seconds, it really kicks in, a little surprising bitterness on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of a big thing of some of these German lagers is they're actually quite balanced, even if they are quite sweet to start with. It's probably worth looking at the mouthfeel of this one as well, because we've got quite a sort of creamy texture in there a bit. A medium to full. We haven't done very many full-bodied beers. This I'd have called this medium probably, and reasonably well carbonated.
Yeah, so I went medium on the body, carbonation and creaminess on it, and yeah, it's hard to really describe the balance of the beer because it changes during the actual tasting. So sweet and then bitter.
It's sometimes worth just calling out flavor starts something, finishes something else.
Yeah, that's what I wrote in the flavor section as a comment.
Yeah, because it does change. The flavour is this whole experience thing that goes on from the beginning to well after you've swallowed it. So yeah, you often have words like lingering, especially around bitterness, or long lasting, which are often good descriptive terms to use. Okay, while we sip at that, let's have a think about malts, barley, malting and things. So some of this you'll probably already know just as general brewers. I'm going to cover quite a lot of stuff relatively fast. And obviously starting at the beginning, I'm going to concentrate a little bit on things that might be useful for describing flavour, but generally knowing the process is good for, if not the tasting exam, then the online exam. There's definitely likely to be questions about malting processes. So starting with barley, where it all starts, there's two basic groups they split into, your spring and winter barleys. which depends on when they're sown and harvested. Winter stuff goes in the autumn, harvested late spring. Spring stuff goes in early spring, harvested sometime in the summer. Interestingly, most US malting barley is spring barley, whereas European barley is mostly spring, but the UK ones, the well-known UK ones, are winter barleys. A lot of barley goes to animal feed, including pretty much all 6-row that's grown outside America. Mentioning 6-row, so I haven't really said anything about that. There are 2 types of barley, 2 and 6-row. 2-row has 2 parallel rows opposite each other of kernels on the seed head thing. 6-row is more like a spiral around it. 6-row kernels are usually smaller, harder, but there's more of them. So the yield per acre is higher, which is why it's often grown for animal feed as well as for brewing in America. Yeah, 6-rows only really used to brew in the US. A few types you might hear of are Morex, Russell, Excel, Robust, and Standard. Don't worry about the names. They're just some for information. The barley kernels are higher in protein in 6-row. They've got more husks, therefore higher tannins, and they have very high enzyme content, which is probably the most interesting thing from a brewing point of view. Running through those, the high protein can cause more break material, as can the high tannins, because when we get onto this, we'll be talking about tannins and proteins and break. But the high enzyme levels in 6-row has led to them being used quite a lot with adjuncts. So this is among the reasons why American light lagers and things are high in things like corn and rice. This case unconvertible adjuncts like corn and rice to dilute down the protein levels, to get rid of the break problem and the possible tannin ones later on. Anyway, getting on to the more interesting ones, 2-row, basically everything apart from your American classic lagers uses 2-row varieties. You've got the UK ones, the US ones to start with. We have Clade, who I can't pronounce, Harrington. There's a series of ones called Moravian that are primarily owned by Coors, made by Coors. In Europe, you'll find Chariot, Alexis, and Hana. And in the UK ones, you probably know Maris Otter, Halcyon, Pinot, and Concerto. Some of those you don't see at a homebrew level except in the mixes. So if you get things called like Crisp does a pale malt, that will probably be something like Pinot or Concerto, whereas things like Halcyon and Maris Otter are usually called out specifically. The big breweries use a mix. They'll be changing their varieties all the way through to get the same specification. And we'll talk a little bit about specification. I'm not really going to dive into the details of a malt spec sheet here. It's something that's much better to actually go and look up online and see a sheet and compare and contrast all the various bits of information you get on there. I may touch on it a bit more when we get into wort production in a later session. So with homebrewers, we hear a lot about Maris Otter. Maris Otter is a relatively new malt, new barley variety. First introduced in the 1950s, producing very small quantities for quite a long time, and growing quite rapidly over the past probably 5 years, maybe 10. For the UK, the last figures I have on production were 2014. Interestingly, the biggest few were Tipple, Pinot, Concerto, and Belgravia. You might see Pinot around, but the rest of them you're unlikely to see except in the blends. These go to your big beer breweries and turned into European lagers and your classic brown bitters. I don't know if Dave may run across these occasionally. On the homebrew scale, you'll often see recipes from places like America that just say things like 2-row. You can usually replace those out in the UK with any of the ones apart from Maris, which is a bit too much. Otherwise, American 6-row just use any base malt. For for the impact of of malt on flavour is usually down to the barley side on flavour is usually down to the husk and the variety, where some of them are more interesting than others. You get your historic malts now, so your Chevaliers and things going around, which are worth knowing about, but probably unlikely to turn up anywhere in this sort of exam session. Right, now we've got to the barley out of the field. Let's drink some more beer. This one I have done a score sheet on. So next I was going to suggest we go for the Alt, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong because I'm not a German. It could be an Alt. This one is the one that isn't strong and isn't a lager, but we haven't done an Alt beer. And this is Bolten Alt, and I'm in Bolten, so I sort of had to get it. Who's done a sheet on this one as well as me? Has anyone tried this one? Okay, let's all give it a go, and then then we can get your comments. Then I'll read out what I've done. I've actually filled in for the ones I'm doing from now on one of the exam score sheets, just because we need to start moving towards using those. I've put a link on the video to the exam score sheet. I'll add it into our the group chat as well, the group channel as well, just so that we can all get a few of those printed out, as well as the checkbox ones, because they are different, and you need to start getting understanding how much you can write and how much time we've got about them. So let's get into some aroma. I will turn the page here to get to Alt beer. Any initial thoughts on the aroma from anyone?
There's a bit of fig roll there, if we're talking biscuits.
Now we could, once again, you probably have to describe that to Americans. Though fig and pastry probably covers it.
I got quite an initial sulphurous aroma, followed by what I thought was kind of a muskiness, but maybe more like a smoky tobacco almost.
Yeah, that's an interesting call. I'm not getting those, but different people get different things, as we always say. I'm thinking, I will read mine out in a moment. The aroma description goes, clean yet robust and complex aroma of grainy, rich malt and spicy hops with a restrained low to medium low, fruity, and with rich baked bread, nutty, toasty bread crust notes. Hop aroma vary from moderate to low, have peppery, spicy, floral, herbal, or perfumey character associated with Sansa type hops. Yeah, Sansa has been quite specific here. It's one of the rare occasions when the guideline is fairly specific on the hop, though I don't see the Hallertau or any of the other German ones being a problem. They come out with similar aroma profiles. Any other thoughts on the aroma from anybody? Okay, I'll dive into my thinking on the scores of this one. So I got 2 bottles of this one. So this was from a few days ago. What have I got? I've got predominant spicy note in the start of aroma with some low herbal elements. Alongside this, there's a distinct note of bread and a light graininess. Final hint of caramel tending towards toffee. No diacetyl, no DMS. So the one thing to pull out of there is put the know this, know that in, if you have any space. More what is in their descriptors are better, but if you get a chance to put know this, know that, there is in this version of the score sheet a set of check boxes down this side for the actual floors, but it's always worth calling out no specific things. I mean, I could have gone further, but I'd ran out of space. Usually the ones you call out are things like diacetyl, DMS, acetaldehyde, the big few. So appearance-wise, the description says colour range from light amber to deep copper, stopping short of brown. Bronze orange is most common. Brilliant clarity, thick, creamy, long-lasting off-white head. My head seems to have faded a fair amount, but often they last better. Usually you're not too rude about heads. You'll say it fades and maybe knock off a point if it goes down to nothing. But if it starts out reasonable, you can usually blame your glass. Because when you're going through an entire judging session, when you're doing the exam, you will have a fresh glass per beer. But when you're judging, they will have come around a few times and been washed, but maybe a bit damp, and may not be perfectly good for head retention. So what I said here was perfectly clear, amber in colour with a very foamy head that fades slowly. This is one of the ones that's often quite hard to fill out all the space on. Head across. You are trying to fill up the space, but often you run out. You've not got much more to say. There's only so far you can describe colours for a good beer like this. With a beer that has haze and things, you've got more to talk about, especially if it's inappropriate for the style. Okay, let's drink some.
I'm still getting some of that very slight smokiness and tobacco in there as well. But it might just be me on my glass.
Okay,
No, I'm getting a bit of smokiness too.
I could go with the tobacco thing. I'm getting out on the flavour. It's sort of herbal, tobacco-y thing in the bitterness. I can see where that's coming from. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just agree with that. Is that the bitterness comes through initially, and then there's a bit of smokiness there, but
I'm getting a bit of astringency, a kind of bitterness that's not from the hops.
Yeah, I mean, these are classically quite high in bitterness. We're talking, where's the stats? Up to 50 IBU, which is getting into IPA land. So I've had examples of these where the bitterness was quite dominant. The description here, it does say assertive hop bitterness, well balanced by a sturdy yet clean, crisp malt character. And yeah, definitely assertive bitterness in this example. Any other thoughts? And I'll say what I've put down. So I've got bread-like notes at core of flavour, heading into seeded bread crust, some spicy notes. Read my own handwriting. Carry through from the aroma. Finish with a lingering herbal bitterness, no DMS, diacetyl, or acetaldehyde. I could probably put another sentence in there about spiciness primarily. Mouthfeel, another hard one to fill up much of. Medium light body with moderate carbonation. Carbonation a little on the low side for style. This example, it's a little bit higher. And then there's the overall impression, which I should probably have got you all to tell me about. It's an excellent example of style, perhaps a little low in carbonation, and the hop, both in flavour and aroma, are a little possibly one-dimensional, so they're just spicy. Whereas the description says they could be peppery, spicy, floral, or herbal, or perfumey. These are just things that knock off the odd point. When you have a worse beer, you've got a lot more to talk about. And that ended up at a 44 out of 50, which is just below outstanding, which is fair enough. Any other thoughts on this beer?
The smokiness might actually be just a blend of the spicy and pepperiness, to be honest.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, when you're doing the exam with this, you won't have the guidelines. So, but you will with a beer like this. You need to start thinking about those sort of flavour mixes. That smokiness perhaps from this and that. That's a perfectly good thing to say. yeah, you're trying to with the main sections of the score sheet, you are describing what you can taste, smell, see, sense. So all of these things are good. The more words, the descriptive things you use, the better. Now, okay, let me find the next section here. Cool. Okay, if we're good, we'll keep sipping at that, and I'll talk a little bit about the malting process. Once again, you can find out an awful lot more about this. I'll have a few references and things to look at the end. But with most of this, especially the multiple choice exam, you need to know the basics, some of the details for more general interest. So I'm going to talk a bit about malting processes and how you get the various types of malt in this before we get on to the next beer. So you've got your barley coming from the field, gets to the maltings. The first thing that happens is it sits for around 48 hours, alternately submerged in water and draining the water out of it. When it comes in, the moisture content's about 10 to 12%. This is raised to about 44%-ish. During this steeping process, it depends a little bit on the malting and the type of malt being produced. During this process, we start with getting germination happening in there before we move on to the actual germination process. This the important thing here is we're using enzymes. Well, the seed is using enzymes to break down the protein and carbohydrate matrix around the starch grains, which are the bits we're interested in. At the end of steeping, they tell when steeping's finished by looking at a sample of the grains and seeing how many of them you can start to see the root emerging from it. This is called chitting among British maltsters. I think it is elsewhere, but that's the British term. When it gets to the level they're used to, they shove them in the germination chamber, or container or whatever. It has a different terms. These are some of the things you'll see for things like floor maltings and things. If you see videos of it, they're big rooms with a relatively thin layer of malt on the floor. We stay there for 4 to 5 days usually, breaking down the matrix. This is something you will see a lot of in brewing literature. This breaking down the matrix is the thing that's called conversion. This controls the amount of starch and therefore sugars we can actually get out of the malt at the end. During this process, you'll be blowing warm air through the bed of malt and turning it over regularly. So in your historic maltings, you'll have a man with a rake going to and fro, or a sort of plough-like thing. In your modern ones, we'll have a machine doing that, just turning the bed over to try and stop the roots and sprouts that are emerging from it getting tangled into a big mat of horribleness, so you can never get your malt out again. Keeping quite control of the temperature at this point, just to optimize the germination process. Once the mechanism for actually telling this is done is usually by taking a sample off to your lab, or just by knowledge and looking at it for the more historical ones. After you've got this stage through, we're off to drying the malt. This is where we start changing the process for different types of malt, but sticky on base malt. We're drying at 82 to 88 C odds. I've converted these numbers from a Fahrenheit source, so I may be off by a degree or two. For 2 to 4 hours for base malts. The lower end probably for your lagers and the like, but it's more the lower end of temperature. One term that's worth knowing about is Maillard reactions. These are the browning reactions you get in food. They'll turn up all the way through your brewing process, but this is sort of where they start. You're converting amino acids and sugars combined with water and heat into different sets of sugars and caramel proteins and various other flavor proteins. These will happen all the way through your process, but this is sort of where they start happening. Just throwing the term in so people know about it. So I'm going to split down the types of malts a little bit just to give us some basic breakdown. I'm keeping this fairly brief at the moment. There's a lot more detail you can get both from online sources and a couple of books. So starting at the palest end, Pilsner malts. Traditionally less modified, but the modern ones are pretty good. You'll see floor malted malts, which are the ones done by more traditional processes, are most commonly found among this area. But you can also get your classic lager malt, which is now basically an industrial product where all of this is run by machines. They're dried at the lower end of that temperature scale I mentioned earlier, and that's pretty much all that's done with it. Next up the scale, pale ale malts, which are our classics. Slightly higher temperature than Pilsner malts and possibly a slightly longer duration. Maybe a different type of barley to start with, but you get a little bit more colour in them. Now, mild ale malts, which we run across in the UK a fair amount, is the next temperature step up. It gets a bit of browning, a bit more of those Maillard reactions going, but it's still just dried. Vienna and Munich are an interesting pair because they're usually the base barley of the stars that are being used to make Pilsner malts, but they're treated much more like pale ale and mild malts. Munich is particularly interesting because they ramp the temperature during the drying process, so it starts low and then goes up to a higher temperature just to get that little bit more colour. You'll see different versions of Munich, and that's just usually the final temperature they've got up to, the difference between Munich 1 and Munich 2. Amber malt is the next one, going back to the UK. Dried at a relatively high temperature, then bumped higher above that temperature range to give a bit more colour. It's definitely worth noting at this point that there are two very different amber malts in the UK. The Crisp and the Baird are quite radically different malts. One is a sort of biscuity, malty flavour. The other goes way off into the coffee sort of region. Just be very aware of which one you're using. Off into the crystals for a brief digression. We all know about the basics of crystal malts. They're kept wet at mash temperature for an hour and a half or longer, then dried at higher temperatures usually. You're trying to get conversion, effectively, that you're running a mash inside each individual grain and then drying it out, so you get the sugars already there rather than just starch, which we need to convert in the mash. Once again, colour descriptors. The UK ones be very cautious on. If you get an EBC or Lover Bond level, that's fine. Those are good. But the different brands of UK maltsters use dark, light, medium to mean entirely different things. In general, Baird's is one level lighter than Crisp. I think it's that way around. So you'll find that light Crisp is medium Baird's or vice versa. You just be very careful on the source and look at the actual numbers. American crystal malts tend to come in steps of 10 Lover Bonds. We can't get that in the UK. You can get some of the similar ones from Crisp and fill in the gaps with Baird's, but just look at the numbers. You can use blends to try and hit the middle when an American recipe is looking for somewhere in the middle, but it's never quite the same. Sorry, comment on another forum. And then we get on to your chocolates and black malts. These are dried out to 5%-ish moisture and then roasted in a special drum roaster, classically at around 220C. When you see black patent, the patent is on that drum malts, that drum machine that's long gone out of patent. Probably went out of patent in about 1920. But it's still often called black patent. And then we have our roasted barleys and black barleys and roasted wheats and things, which are all the straight grain without the malting process. You can malt all the other grains, so your oats, your wheat, your sorghum, all sorts of things you can malt. You'll find them, they're worth a try. The process is pretty much the same. Right. That's the malting process. There's a lot more you can find out about that, both online and in various books I'll mention in a bit. but really a basic knowledge of it is what you need for beer judging, and then we'll talk a little bit about in the next session, next part of this, about flavors and off flavors you get from malt. But let's get on to our Dunkel. Okay, would someone like to start talking us through aroma?
I'm going to opt out of this one as I've got the wrong bottle, so I'll just listen in.
Fair enough. So we've got wheat beer coming up at some point. We do have a Dunkel in there somewhere.
I'm sure I'll make use of it somewhere.
Won't go to waste.
At the risk of being cake obsessed, there's some marzipan I'll get in there. It's very rich.
Yeah, I think one of the descriptions on here is chocolate and nuts, and marzipan, when you mix in some caramel and toffee, is basically nuts, so which is a good description. I mean, I'd probably be starting this one in the brown bread or bread crust sort of region, perhaps with a little bit of toast, and then going back into caramel and toffee somewhere around there. In some of the versions of this, you can get into quite chocolatey.
I've got actually entirely the wrong Dunkel. I've got Andex. Never heard of it. But it's not a classic example, but mine, I think, has broken the rule, and I would say it is slightly roasty, so I think that's why it's not a classic example.
Yeah, I mean, you can get the chocolate side to it, and you tend to get more. You wouldn't usually expect too much roastiness into it beyond chocolate, especially in the aroma. Yeah, so in the flavour, burnt and bitter flavours from roasted malt are inappropriate, as are pronounced caramel flavours, but we'll come on to that in a sec. Well, let's come on to that now. I mean, in this case, I'd be probably starting to talk about toffee and things at this point. Does anyone have got any other thoughts?
Yeah, but perhaps a little bit of the treacle and almost the bitterness that you get from overboiling, sugar, when you're cooking sugar and you've boiled it a little bit too much, there's a bit of bitterness there as well.
I mean, that's what a set of descriptors I used quite a lot. And one of the ones I use is the various colours of caramel as you just keep boiling it down. So I tend to go for light, medium, and dark, and then burnt. Going to burnt sugar. I mean, the flavour description here, that everyone keeps tasting, they're dominated by the soft, rich, complex flavour of darker Munich malts, usually with the overtones reminiscent of toasted bread crusts, without the harsh, burnt, grainy bitterness, toastiness. Palate can be moderately malty, though it shouldn't be overwhelmingly, cloyingly sweet. Mild caramel toast or nuttiness may be present. Very fresh examples often have a pleasant malty chocolate character that isn't roasty or sweet. Burnt or bitter flavours from roasted malts are inappropriate, as are pronounced caramel flavours from crystal malt. Hop bitterness is moderately low but perceptible, with a balance tipped firmly towards the maltiness. Hop flavour is low to none, if noted to be floral, spicy, or herbal. Aftertaste remains malty, though hop bitterness may become more apparent in a medium dry finish. I mean, in this case, I'd be probably thinking a lot of the toffee caramelly words. The breadiness is still there, but it's further back than it was in the aroma, in my opinion. And yeah, it balances definitely towards the malts. Any other thoughts? Any other good words we can throw in?
It's quite sweet and a kind of prune flavour.
Yeah, I'm not getting it too much as fruit, but yeah, I could go with a little bit of dark fruits in there, or dried fruit, which is more like prune. But it's worth while tasting a lot of these, the more German styles and things, to look for ester flavours, because they're often not appropriate if they're there at a higher level. Primarily due to the way the yeast produces esters and then cleans them up again. The interesting beer, this one, because it's traditionally brewed with 100% Munich malt. Yeah, up to 100%, I think. So, yeah. I've never brewed one of these, but I've been meaning to for a long time, because they're quite tasty. All right. Thoughts on appearance and palate, anybody? Mouthfeel, really.
It's much fuller than the other beers we've had this evening.
Yeah, it's certainly a higher body than some of the others. I'd probably call it medium to medium full, maybe. There's certainly more to it. The medium carbonation levels and moderate carbonation. Yeah. And none of the there's certainly no astringency in this one or any of the other things the high bitterness that we've had in some of the alt, for example.
But the head is creamier than the other beers we've had this evening too.
Yeah, we should be looking for. We didn't really cover appearance, but deep copper to dark brown, often with a red or garnet tint. Creamy, light to medium tan head, usually clear, though. Interesting, I've never tried one. Murky, unfiltered versions do exist. Cool. Any other thoughts on this beer? Are we keep moving? Okay, I'm going to zip through relatively lightly the flavours and touch on the off flavours we're likely to get from malt, mostly concentrating on good words to use when describing the flavours you can taste. Okay, so starting at the pale malts, the sort of things we're looking at here was you're likely to use a grainy, then into the variations on bread. You can go to seeded bread, you can go into brown bread, white bread, bread crust, and then into your sort of cake and baked products, both versions of biscuit. But I would once again divide which sort of biscuit you're talking about. Can all be things brought in by pale malts and base malts. You tend to get more towards the grainy ones with your pilsners, your German malts, and more towards your biscuits and things when you get into mild malt and similar things to that, or maybe even your Munichs. Good things to say was start with crystal malt flavours. Caramel's the obvious one. As I said in the earlier one, you can go through all your various colours of caramel. So your sort of light, medium, dark caramel, or heavily boiled. Sometimes it's worth describing how the thing you're talking about can be produced. So yeah, dark caramel is usually it's a useful term. Then going on into things like burnt sugars when you get into your special bees and your dark crystals. Rock candy, the chunks you get with coffee is quite a nice descriptor. Occasionally, toffee, and then obviously you go off into the dark and dried fruits. Some of those flavours can come from crystal malts, especially once again the darker ones. So your special bees and the like can give you things like burnt raisin is a nice one, or raisin to start with. With burnt raisin, you're thinking of the ones you get in the sort of surface of cooked cakes and things. Chocolate and roast malts, obviously the obvious ones are coffee and chocolate, but you're quite welcome. You can work good things to go into are the more bitter birds and acidic trace. You can even say ash, cigars, anything to do with tobacco often fits in there, especially when it's on the fire. Getting into the acrid, which can start getting unpleasant, but can also be okay in some beers. There are a whole load of things you can go around with the dark and chocolate ones around fires, so ashes, bonfires, and the like may come. Bonfires and more smoked malt. but be creative about the words you use to describe these things. So the two important things to think about in malt and off flavors, there's a couple of things that come out of them. The obvious one to cover is DMS. This is your cooked corn. We had parsnip, I think, was one of the descriptions, and pumpkin. It's another description that's gone for this. I think we came up with at the off flavor session. So there's a precursor to DMS, which is methyl methionine, or SMM. SMM isn't all you might need to remember. This comes out in the malting process. Much of it is driven off when the malt's being dried, but a little bit is left in most malt. Interesting, there may be also another chemical called DMSO, which is dimethyl sulfoxide. DMS is dimethyl sulfide. DMSO is non-volatile and can carry through your entire process and then be converted back to DMS by yeast. Little bastards, those yeast. Not a lot you can do about this. DMSO is pretty low, except in some specific sets of malt. So if you get DMS, it may be a yeast-derived thing in the end, in that it's converted DMSO back. Once again, that's pretty rare. As all of you almost certainly know, the best thing to get rid of DMS is a good boil, and wrap it with open top or steam extraction. Interesting, the other thing that might help with some of this is to cool quickly. This may be a brewing myth, it may not. There hasn't been a lot of research done with the people in primarily Australia who do no chill and don't seem to be running into DMS issues that you'd expect if cooling made that much of an impact on it. But if you're having a DMS problem in your beer, mentioning, or you get a beer in a competition that has a distinct DMS problem, it may be worth mentioning cooling as well as the whole steam extraction, not letting it drip back into your beer thing, and a long enough boil. Short boil is the other thing that will cause DMS, possibly. Evidence, once again, is a little bit flaky. There are people doing 15-minute boils or 20-minute boils that don't seem to have a problem, probably due to good quality malt rather than anything else.
On the DMS, is one of the biggest improvements to my lagers was just doing a full no cover boil, and that seemed to take a lot of those sorts of things out.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our pro breweries, most of them will have some way of getting steam off the boil. Mostly they'll take it off the top and chill it and drop it out. But even the big breweries do pretty much the same. The other thing, well, DMS, yes, it's you will find it quite a lot in beers when you're judging. It's one of those things to go through and do the know this, know that, know the other in your little mental checklist of things you should be looking for. Some of the others will stand out. The more unusual off flavors, like your, say, butyric acids, will jump out at you, but you should basically go through your mental checklist of the core ones of your DMS, your diacetyl, your acetaldehyde, maybe your acetic acids, and then lactic acids, just so you can just run through those before you start thinking about the actual descriptors you're looking for. So right at the other end of our set of flavors that can come out of malt, we get the other bad one, which is tannins. A tannin is a polyphenol. So anyone with chemistry will know a phenol ring is like a benzene ring with a hydroxyl group. I think it's a hydroxyl group off the edge of it. So it's a sort of circular link of carbon atoms with some other stuff hung off the side of it. They're present in basically seeds, plants, wood. They live around in organelles inside the plant cells. What happens in most of the brewing process, they're there in the malt still, but the majority is removed by reacting with proteins during the boil. So the combination of protein and polyphenol gives you your hot and cold break, along with a few other bits and pieces. So then you need them. They're there to pull the protein out and stop you having hazy beer. But if they carry through, they can end up some interesting off flavors. Well, not interesting, not very pleasant. In finished beer, they're also part of the reaction that causes chill haze when they react with proteins. There are finings you can use to help pull them out. I think PVPP is the big one. I can't remember what that stands for. It's called Polyclar in America, and I think it's called Polyclar in the UK as well. It's one of those additional finings you can add to remove primarily chill haze, but it will pull out polyphenols as well, and hence tannins a bit. It's worth saying that you actually need some tannins in your beer before you get all anti them. Winemakers actually add tannin. In your sort of country wines and the like, you'll tend to find people adding some tannin to give a little bit of balance to the flavour. So at low levels, it's not a problem. It's not something that will add particularly to a detectable flavour, but it'll definitely be there. What you're looking for to detect these is a sort of puckering feeling more than a flavour. Go suck on a tea bag. That's the sort of thing you're looking for. Don't do it more than once. It's not very fun. So extra strong tea. So if anyone really likes their strong tea, it's the same set of flavours you get there. It's often confused with bitterness, especially as tannins also trigger your bitterness taste buds, as well as they sort of dry your mouth out, cause odd salivary reactions, but also can trigger the bitterness taste buds as you sample beer. So you just be a little bit careful on calling astringency, and do you actually get that drying feeling in your mouth. Now, we'll cover a little bit more of this in wort production in a couple of weeks' time, but a couple of the causes are mash related. So if your mash pH is too high, around 5.8 rather than the sort of 5.2 to 5.4 you normally want, that can cause tannin extraction. This happens most commonly in sparging. As you start putting more water in, the buffers that are in the mash get washed out into your wort, and the pH can rise. So often you'll see people describing this as part of over sparging. So if you fly sparge or continuous sparge, then if you run it too long, you'll start getting tannins extracted. The tannins are usually from husks, but can be from other parts of the seed. So usually the things you'll say if you get tannins in there, you'd be looking at mash pH and your sparge technique are the things to describe. What I usually do when saying things to improve on off flavors is you could consider looking at X and Y, because you don't know what their process is. You have no idea of what the guys who sent you this beer has done. So you can say perhaps this could have caused it, or perhaps that could have caused it, but you have no idea about what they've actually done. So you're making suggestions of how to improve the process, and this one is a particularly clear one because there's a couple of possible causes here. Yeah, so that's the off flavors bit from tannins and DMS, and most of the stuff I have on malt, apart from talking about a book. So shall we get into some Doppelbock? So yeah, there's a classic example. We have the Salvator. First obvious thing about these beers is the names. Salvator is sort of generally believed to be the sort of prototypical, the first one, and you'll find a lot of them have the Ator name. So you can have, where's the rest of the class? We have Salvator, Optimator, and all sorts of other ones with Ator on them. One of those German traditions. These makes them easy to identify. Cool, so let's get into this beer. So has anyone looked at a score sheet on these beers? On this one?
Yeah, I did score sheet on this one.
Cool. Do you want to start with aroma?
Yeah. To be honest, before I start with aroma, it's a cracking beer. It's a really nice beer. But I've got rich fruit aroma, low stroke, no hop aroma, medium sweet fruits, raisins, dates, with a slight hint of black cherries as well for me.
I love black cherries. That's a very good call. I mean, these you start to get into the lagers that actually have some significant ester in them, which always you probably won't get much of in some of the lighter ones. Any other thoughts on this aroma?
You can get the alcohol off that, and it's adding to the fruitiness coming off there.
Yeah, it's almost like the alcohol carries the fruit, the aromas actually, so it brings it out a little bit more. And there's a slight bit of spice as well, I think, from the hops, but only subtle.
You could go with pepperiness, and some of those aromas can come from the alcohol as well. But yeah, I think in this case, I'd probably call it the hop. So aroma descriptors here, we're looking at strong maltiness. Darker versions will have significant Maillard products, offer some toasty aromas, which I'm not getting in this example. Like caramel is acceptable. Lighter versions will have a stronger malt presence with some Maillard products and toasty notes. Virtually no hop aroma, though light noble hop aroma is acceptable in pale versions. Moderately low malt derived dark fruit character may be present, but is optional. In dark versions, this is actually a sort of on the paler side, but does have some of that. Very slight chocolate-like aromas may be present in dark versions. No roast or burnt to be present. Moderate alcohol may be present. This is one of the more interesting styles in that it actually has quite a variety. If you look at the statistics on this, the SRM, the colour, can go from 6 to 25, which is quite a big range. So you do get much darker examples than this, verging on the brown.
I've got the first on the list of classic examples, the Andexer Doppelbock, and I think you can see holding it up. I can see everyone else's on the screen there. Mine is a lot darker than yours.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to have my focus on various people during this, so you'll all star on the video a bit. Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of variation in colour on these. There is no Dunkel Doppelbock, really. So this covers the entire range. Cool. So appearance, we're looking deep gold, dark brown in colour. Dark version have ruby highlights. Lager should provide good clarity. Yep. Large, creamy, persistent head. I've not got one, but that may be my glassware again. Colour varies with base style. White for pale versions, off-white for dark ones. Stronger versions may have impaired head retention, which is a possibility. That's a good thing to pull out, is when you're looking at the stronger beer styles, alcohol doesn't help head retention. This one's only 7.9, so it's not right at the top. So when you're looking at barley wines, Doppelbocks are in this. They're in that range. Be aware that poor head retention may not be a problem. It just may be due to alcohol. The other thing is to think about is legs, which if you pour the glass around, you can just see. Well, you definitely can't see in the video. There's some staying on the side of the glass, like you'd expect with a good whiskey. Once again, not a major point in the style, but an interesting thing to observe nonetheless. Anyone want to throw in something on the aroma? Do you want to start on the aroma? On the flavour, Alex, since you filled in the sheet.
I've got a high sweet malt presence, but with a low lingering bitterness. I added the lingering bit after you you mentioned it before. I've got some slight esters coming in there as well, but I can't be specific with it. But with a kind of a dry, sweet finish as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's all good stuff in there. So things to start thinking about is describing the malt flavors and break them down into say, what have I got here? The fruit call is good. So in that case, we'll be looking at maybe dark fruit. Maybe you could start talking stone fruit, things like plum, perhaps a little bit. And then with the main ones, start thinking about your breads and your grains, perhaps. I mean, I might be in the cake like we had earlier. With your stronger beers, especially with some alcohol in them, some of the Christmassy products can work as well as descriptions, but that's not got enough to be Christmas pudding yet. But you can certainly go.
So Rick,
go.
Sorry, it's just to check on that then. If we've kind of, because I obviously went fairly not detailed, but more detailed on the sweet fruits, the dark fruits in the aroma side of things. But it's okay then to kind of clarify that again through the flavour. Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, I often use continues from aroma or something like that, because a lot of flavour is in effect aroma. So repetition is not a problem. In many ways, it's a good thing. You, in particular, call out anything that doesn't carry over. So I've not any of these, but I filled out one recently. I think it was one of the SJ Pour ones where it had some good citrus aroma that didn't carry over into the flavour. These should specifically call those out, but also the XYZ continues into aroma or changes into something else in flavour, if you see what I mean. You're looking at using the most descriptive terms you can come up with that actually fit with what the beer is. And good is not a good term. You're trying to look things like low, medium, high, rather than good X, Y, or Z or bad X, Y, or Z. On a general level, but yeah, definitely repeat what you said in aroma and just fine tune it for what's actually changed.
That's great. I was just a bit concerned that, kind of just repetition, but of course, like I say, if we can, like I say, fine tune it, tweak it a bit into because there's a lot that was the same from the aroma into the flavour. So, but that's good advice. Thanks.
You're describing what you're sensing, and it may be the same thing or maybe similar thing. And but clarify it and say, I mean, things like, bread-like things carry over from aroma into flavour with added toastiness or whatever, or added fruit or dark fruit or whatever you're tasting. Your aim here is in these sections is to describe what you're sensing, and there a little bit how it matches the style, but how it matches the style mostly comes in overall impression. And the more interesting things you can pull out, a lot of it comes with time and practice. A lot of the time you'll be tasting a beer and you'll go, I know that flavour, and won't be able to tell what it is until you taste the thing again, whatever the flavour you're tasting is, and you go, oh yes, that was what it is. And you'll gradually gain descriptive terms, especially as you read other people's score sheets. I'll talk a little bit about score sheets and looking at good ones in a minute. Any other thoughts on flavour?
Sticky toffee pudding.
Yeah, we're back at our baked goods again. Well, in this case, boiled goods. Yeah, I can go with that. Once again, very British descriptor. Americans will sort of get it. They'll get the toffee. Need to be a little bit careful about pudding, because we have very odd ideas of what a pudding is compared with the Americans. But yeah, so sort of toffee steeped cake, sponge cake. It's probably the closest Americans would get to it. But a lot of them will go and look it up. If you give them a term like that, they'll be understood in the UK, but not there. They'll go and find, oh, that sounds interesting. But yeah, once again, they'll give you that little bit caution. Your exams are likely to be marked by a mix of UK and American people. So be a little bit careful about what terms you use. Yeah, with this one, the one thing I'll be pulling out a chunk of is the alcohol, which is fairly present in my example in the flavour, especially in the end of it. Probably using maybe peppery, maybe just calling it out as warming alcohol. You can pull that into either. Yeah, you probably go into flavour in this case. It definitely doesn't go into any of the off flavours, your solventy ones. But one thing to look out for in these stronger beers is for those longer chain alcohols, the fusels, which can go into solvents and the like, which are quite common in homebrew examples. Cool. Any thoughts on mouthfeel? Or on the beer in general?
My one's quite thick and heavy, I would say.
Yeah, so in this case, we should be looking for medium full to full body, which, yeah, it is. Carbonation, moderate to low, very smooth out harshness, astringency, light alcohol warmth, maybe noted. Yeah, doesn't burn, which is good.
Well, I don't know what your one's like, but mine is delicious.
Yeah, I'm going to be sipping this for a while.
Yeah, you definitely need to make sure you sip it because it's a bit dangerous. I think if you could get through a bit of that, couldn't you?
It's interesting that 7.9%, I think 7.9, yeah, it's sort of in modern IPA range. But it tastes like there's a lot more to it. I'm enjoying that beer. Cool. So I was going to point out a few things worth looking at resource-wise while we sip this. Not necessarily only on these beers on malt and maltings, but in general. There's one obvious book on malt and maltings that I haven't got, which is from the hops, yeast, malt, and water series. There is a malt book that goes way beyond what you're likely to need for the exam, but is really quite interesting. I've read bits of it. I don't own it. If you really want to dive in the details, have a look at that. There's also some quite good stuff on basically the Brewers Association and various maltsters websites. It's worth having a poke around on the maltsters website. We could have a run through of a malt spec sheet that Dave will be deeply familiar with, or becoming deeply familiar with, but they're quite complicated, and a lot of the homebrew suppliers don't give them to you. And with the UK maltsters, they actually vary quite a lot what you get from maltster to maltster, whether you get the fine grind or whatever. Worth having a little bit of a Google around malt spec sheets just to get some idea of what the terms are, but not much more than that. One thing I don't think I've mentioned, but we may have mentioned before, is one of the podcasts. Have we mentioned Dr. Homebrew? Okay, so this is one of the Brewing Network podcasts, which basically is a couple of BJCP judges judging a few beers that have been sent in. They're usually a pair of at least master level judges. Definitely worth listening to. They've not been going that long, so digging back through their back catalogue, it's worth there just for the language the guys use. It's noticeable there is a differentiation between American and British scoring, but that's always been true. We're meaner than the Americans by about 3 points, I reckon. Recently, if any of you get it, Zymergy magazine, which is the American Homebrew Association, have been doing a series of top judges write about beers. So like 4 or 5 of them will describe a single beer. We'll bring a few copies on to Manchester Homebrew stuff if people are there, or if anyone at Chorlton gets it, it's worth trying to get hold of a copy off somebody and have a quick look at those, because they're quite interesting. They show things like the variation in scores between judges. They usually have Gordon Strong in there, who's the guy who sort of runs the BJCP at the moment, and he can be 10 points off another judge. These things happen even with a classic example of the style. And if you're actually judging, you go there and talk it through and work it out between you. But these gals have obviously judged it separately and sent their scores in. It's worth looking for. That was all I was going to do this time. Sorry, it's been a little bit abbreviated. I'm trying to buy a house with a bigger brewing garage in it, so I've had less time than usual to prep stuff. You'll see the brewing garage in a few sessions, hopefully.